Hello, sir.
How's it going?
Thank God. I'm going to add the link to the chat if anyone wants to join. Thank God I'm doing well.
Do you have your tea?
I got my tea. Yeah, I have
Okay.
my tea. My partner was called into Miluim, into the reserves. So, and why is it not? I just see this message from Randos United. An error occurred on YouTube. This is unusual. Okay, so hopefully it'll work out. So that's been a little challenging, and it's sort of touch and go. They're like they haven't told him how long he's going to be in for. Yeah. So we're still sort of seeing how that works out. And but aside, that's been okay. Hanukkah's here, as I'm sure you know, as we've been celebrating. So that's nice. Different vibe in the air, so to speak.
Yeah.
So the festival is here. Usually, my wife and I have we've done for many years a very big party, I guess, at our house. But last year we didn't have one, and we said this year was going to be our last year in Jerusalem. We're going to throw a real banger. But the war happened, and we sort of didn't, we didn't feel like we wanted to. I don't know. Maybe we made a mistake, but it was more chill this year.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it's it's different vibe from everybody, so it's tough to kind of assess what would be the right thing to do.
Yeah, exactly. It's a strange vibe over here. Like I was shopping today in Tel Aviv, and then there was a siren went on.
Yeah,
but I'm shopping for tiles. A siren's going on. It's all a weird. It's a weird thing, but thank God it's working out. Yeah. All right. Shall we dive in?
Let's do it. Yeah. Let's see.
I think we didn't. I don't think we did this one.
I don't think we did it. Yeah. So our last one was 9, Rabbi Yonatan.
Right. We were talking about learning Torah from like a poor position. We spoke about how does that mean monetarily poor, spiritually poor, intellectually poor, and we gave different examples of what that means. We spoke about how sofo, it ends up enduring. We spoke about that concept as well. And we also exactly. And then we also spoke about how it's very important to recognize that even we talked about the different perspective of the poor person and the rich person, and the poor person doesn't have time sort of to deal with the nitty gritty, but more deals with the more spiritual concept ideas, and how the rich person has more time to deal with the nitty gritty. But if he doesn't focus on the spiritual things, when hard things come, he won't know how to deal with it. And that's why you have to take into consideration that even when you're wealthy and you sort of want to rest on your laurels, that's really the time to be focusing more and working on to make sure you are giving yourself a robust
foundation or understanding.
Yeah, I was thinking about an airbag. I get into a lot of these situations. I was one of them today, where there's like people drowned or choke or car accidents, and I'm always there. So today was another move where there was like this very intense car accident in the highway. So I got out. I had to like smash the guy's glass window open, but I had to use my I have this podcast gear that I never use, but I have like the stand for the microphone. So I was using that, but we got him out of the window in the end. But my family sort of laughs at this point, or they blame me for this, because they're like, you're always in these scenarios, like you're the one that causes it. So
wait, you said this happened today?
This happened today. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I have again. There's a lot of stories. Little kids falling in ponds. People like they had to do like I had to resuscitate someone. It's intense, but yeah, I don't know. It's to a point where like as I saw it happening, I was like, not again. Like, and I also feel bad because like I'm not in the accident, right? So like I'm like, all right. So, anyways, I was gonna say that just thinking of the concept of an airbag just made me think about that. But you want to basically safeguard yourself. Okay, so let's get cracking with. So now we're moving on to 10.
Yep.
Okay. Rabbi Meir Omer, הווי ממעץ בעסק ועסוק בתורה, והווי שפל רוח בפני כל אדם, ואם ביטלת מן התורה, יש לך בטלים הרבה כנגדך, ואם עמלת בתורה הרבה, יש שכר הרבה ליתן לך. Rabbi Meir would say, engage minimally in business and occupy yourself with Torah. Be humble before every man. Be humble before every man. If you neglect the Torah, there will be many more causes for neglect before you. If you toil much in Torah, there is much reward to give to you.
Okay.
So, Rabbi Meir. So this is before the sealing of the Mishnah, right? Some say this is where, this is where Rav Yehuda Hanasi, the prince, when he puts together all the Mishnayot to start writing them down, he's basing it on an earlier work that Rav Meir was already putting together of some of these things. So that he's like sort of working off of his footnotes, so to speak. Interesting tidbit about Rav Meir is that there are some that say that he was a descendant of Neron, the emperor,
Okay.
and which is a very, very bad emperor who also apparently used up all like some sort of purple marble. He basically used all the purple marble in the world, I think, or something like that. He has this crazy bath. You could see it in Rome. It's this massive bath just out of this purple marble. He was really into that. Apparently his designers have a very either time. They're like, we get it, Nero. A lot of this everywhere.
Everything purple bath. Yeah.
There's a story of Rav Meir that he tried to remove. Maybe we mentioned this earlier on. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, who was the head of the Sanhedrin at the time, they tried to have him removed. They tried to pull off a coup, and they tried to. The story goes that they tried to embarrass him by asking him specific questions about this, about a more obscure topic. But someone heard this and went and sat next to the rabbi without the rabbi knowing and read out loud this topic. And then the rabbi, the next day when he had the question, he already had it in his head because he heard it from the student. Now, once this happened, they decided to, because seemingly Rav Meir was trying to sort of climb the ladder, the hierarchy ladder, right? And for ego purposes, so to speak, they decided to call him Acherim Omrim and not use his name anymore. And there is an interesting midrash that when Jacob meets Esau, it said he was fearful. And one of the determinations why he was fearful, he says, because if I have to fight with my brother, I'm going to kill the Acherim. And they say that the Acherim is that Yaakov saw that even in Esau, down the line in his lineage, there is someone like Rav Meir. And he was nervous that if he kills Esau, he's going to end up cutting the lifeline and the lineage, and eventually we're not going to get down to Rav Meir. So that's just a little tidbit about and why he connects back to Neron. The idea is that he comes from Edom, which people associate with Rome. So he was a student of Rabbi Akiva. He was also student. This is a different Acher. He was also student of Elisha ben Avuya, the famous Acher, and there's the famous story how they come, they're learning together on Sabbath. He's on his horse and he's walking, and they get to the Tchum Shabbat, to the border of Shabbat, because they have the Eruv, and Acher tells Rav Meir, you should stop walking because you're about to, and Acher and Rav Meir tells him, how about you come back? And it's both come back, live physically, and come back spiritually, come back into the fold. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen. I say this like every time, but he was also one of the brilliant sages. And they say that he was so brilliant that, like, in theory, halacha should be according to Rav Meir, but because he's so brilliant, and I believe it says, no one got to no one really reached the bottom of his understanding. And because it was too abstract, like they knew there was truth there, but it was too abstract for people to handle. So that's
it's like when you do a math it's like you do your math test and the teacher asks you, can you show me how you got there?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I tell him, if you just work a little harder, just keep on looking. Right. So he said, so off the bat, we could see over here that they're saying in classic form, even though you and I have been discussing this already a lot here, which is like, what comes first, what's more important. So here the main focus is seemingly Torah study. And we say that you shouldn't be focusing on your business. And by business, you could look at it as meaning like in your actual, your livelihood. Some people say that business means like the business of worldly matters. Anything that's not Torah is like the other business, so to speak. Ha'esek, the things that you're dealing with. So that shouldn't be the focus, as in less about the monetary stuff, more about like the worldly stuff. Some have interpreted this, as we spoke about also a few portions ago, with regards to the payment of the study of Torah, right? So some people say over here that don't make the study of Torah or the teaching of the Torah a business, as in that's like more holy. Obviously, today we see there's plenty of teachers, and that was one of the things that also had to change because we saw no one was really teaching anymore. And it's sort of like, in a certain way, what is the motivation that Rabbi Meir has even saying this? Because it's clear that while you're engaging in Torah, if you're actually engaging in Torah, you really won't be able to be engaging in other things, right? Like if I'm focusing on Torah right now, then clearly I'm not like dealing with other stuff right now. So like you're just saying like I should deal like less. And so Rav Chaim, the Rav Chaim from Volozhin, the famous Volozhin, so he interpreted this as more of this is sort of take baby steps, as in like mema'et means slowly but surely start to cut down, and that could be over like a long period of time. But the idea is like, even if like Chezi, you just opened up your business, then somewhere in your business plan it should be like, and here I start stepping back and start learning more. But the attitude is like it's not going to lead to Torah study if you tank your business, right? So you got to like, you can't decide like you read this Mishnah and you're like, I'm closing shop, I'm going out, I'm not answering this email. Rather that you have to at some point give yourself a stop and say like, now I have to start focusing on something else, or slowly but surely making my way, changing my habits, so to speak. And
so it's like an active thing, like dynamic.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's like an active thing. It's
Correct.
A dynamic thing that you want to see. You have like, it's about the right balance and the ideal, where you want to, the direction of where you want to move.
It also stresses the idea that the Torah is also basing this on the people's capability, right? So it could be that some people need to greatly reduce their like business, and it could be for others it's just slightly, right? And it sort of depends like where they are and like how they make that balance. So I think those are things that also need to be taken into consideration, and definitely just to make it like a little more relevant today, like when we live in a world where, so my nephew has left the yeshiva system right now. because he's going to be joining the army. And he wasn't going to. He was looking to do not the Hesder where you also do army, but really just do learning for many years. Even though his father and his uncles didn't do that, but that's sort of what he wanted to do. But after the war, he decided I need to join the army right now. But now he's sort of in this middle ground because like they're not ready for him to get drafted yet. So he's at home and he's like working. He's doing like some other side jobs, but he has like this whole series of podcasts and lectures and stuff that he's listening on. And, he is still engaging with that as much as he can while also working, right? Yeah. So you could be like, this person, you could say maybe he's even learning more than he did before because like now he's just like, there's just like this passive sitting down and learning. My point being it's dynamic. It depends on the person's capability. And I think it's, while we could read different interpretations into this line, that to me sticks, close to home. And in general, you could also see the focus being, because I think you and I have already seen that there's clearly a push to also study and also work, but there's a sense where it's setting the priority. Whether you're a soldier or whether you're a scientist, like you could be the leader of your industry, but through what are you leading your industry through? Through the vision of Torah and then science, or is it science and then Torah, basically? Because once your hierarchy is oriented properly, it could be that you're never really, quote unquote, stopping your business, but it's all being done for heaven's sake or being done properly. So then I don't need a neuroscience to be like, maybe you should stop researching how to, fix brains. And his attitude is be like, what do you mean? I'm manifesting Torah in my own way. But we want your priorities obviously set.
Right. I have a question, actually, just something that came up in a previous parasha with Abraham, I think it's Abraham. It's either Abraham or Jacob, but that he calls there is, with one of the disagreements, the conflict with Philistines, with Avimelech, I think, where he calls one well or one area Esek, and it's about, and they translate it as like strife. So I wonder if here it's like I think that's kind of like the translation that you use in terms of Esek being the business, but business that is about strife, or the conflict that you might have in business.
The conflict that you have in business, or the conflict you have between the tension you have between business and Torah?
Well, the tension that maybe is part and parcel of business. In a business environment, it might be more the atmosphere, the environment might more be affording to a kind of strife, a kind of conflict that is about one side trying to get more than the other side. So it kind of leads you into these dynamics where you have a lot of strife. Obviously, you try to avoid that, but that's kind of.
I hear what you're saying there. So the translation would be engage minimally in strife and occupy yourself with Torah, in the sense, which would be like in Torah. While we could just expanding on what you're saying, in Torah, where seemingly you have these disagreements, right? They're not considered strife because they're ultimately like building off each other and are all in the name of La'asok b'Torah. Rather, Havei et be'esek, which is just like strife with no actual goal, right? It's just strife that ends creating that tension.
Yeah, strife in terms of, I was actually just talking to this about somebody. It's strife. I was actually saying like Vervek, in one of the conversations that he had with Jordan Peterson, they were talking about like the distinction between Philo-Nikia and Philo-Sophia, or
Sophia.
Something like that. Right. So Philo-Sophia being something that is more like the dialogos or the machloket l'shem shamayim, like you're doing something for a higher purpose, versus trying to really win an argument or win,
which is Philo-Nikia.
Philo-Nikia, yeah.
Whereas the goddess, the Nike, and where we have victory from, right? The Nike, the shoes, the brand, which Israelis call Nike.
Yeah, that's I still call it
difficult,
Nike.
Right? Okay. Okay, where were we? V'havei shafel ruach bifnei kol adam. Right, so we're talking about humbling yourself. This is something we spoke about many times. So we spoke about versions where there's Some sages see that there should be zero ego. Some sages say that there should be like a certain level of ego. Here is clearly the opinion of zero ego, right? So you always have to make sure that you are, and this relates back to, if you're in this mode, then you'll recognize how every person have his moment. And if you're in this mode, you'll recognize how, when we spoke about how you shouldn't be disrespectful to sort of quote unquote the lowly people. But however, if you always put yourself in this mindset, you won't be looking at people that way. Again, it's sort of there's this built-in tension, because like you almost sort of need this ego to recognize the fact that like you're nothing. Like it's like this game you have to be playing. At some point, you move from, let's say, I guess, mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma, right? It requires for you to tell yourself that you're nothing, but you're someone telling yourself you're nothing. So it really you need to get to this point where you really don't see yourself that way. And I guess that happens as long as you're being serious about that sort of mindset. At some point, you might actually feel that way.
Right. Yeah.
However, we mentioned how in Modeh Ani, in the morning, it sort of requires you to, again, recognize yourself as someone that God is interested in. And for that, it requires, at the very least, the recognition that you exist.
Unto yourself, with your own needs, with this is like a discussion about the ethic. Like, you know that you need the business, or at least part of it, at least initially, or at least for a stretch of time.
They could have said, do no business. They didn't say do no business. They said do less, and then we just gave interpretations. Less could be gradual, less could be nothing for some individuals. So, v'im bitalta mina Torah. So what is bitalta mina Torah? V'im bitalta mina Torah, yesh lecha betalim harbe kenegdecha. So there's concepts of what does bitul Torah mean. So A would be, we don't have to go as extreme. Well, it doesn't mean that you necessarily negate the Torah. Rather, it's considered a negation if you are prioritizing things on top of it, right? So the second you're putting it sort of at second best, it's almost as if like you're pushing it to the last thing, because it can't. It's too important to be seen as something else but the ideal.
Yeah,
and in a certain sense, just like. Also something interesting over here, which is today we have to deal with the fact that it is very difficult for people to constantly engage in Torah. However, King David famously would teach the secrets of the Torah to the, what's the word in Hebrew? To the avaryanim, to the transgressors of Israel, so to speak. And we could also see that like in our era, like where we see like there's sort of like a need for like an immediate remedy, where like I think we could have additional approaches of how the Torah study should happen, basically. So in a sense, I think here they're talking about a certain level of like, if you're not engaging with Torah study all the time, or you're not engaging with Torah study, you could imagine to yourself the model of like the yeshiva boy learning all day. I would argue that while that is important, and that is another model or an approach, there could also be approaches which are go online and learn Tanya with someone. And because there also is place you could be engaging with them. Right.
Depending on where you are.
Right. So the point with that is just to avoid the concept of the Bittul Torah. We're like in a new world today. And generally speaking, like I said,
it doesn't seem so far from you because you think this is the only model. Is that what you mean?
Correct. I mean, the today Torah study, basically, like for scholars, it mainly involves Talmud. And famously, Ramchal spoke about how the Talmud is really preparatory. And that's really just like you're setting up the table for the main course, which are like the stories, the mystical studies of Maaseh Bereshit and Maaseh Merkavah, physics and metaphysics, and the secrets of Torah. That is considered the Davar Gadol. There's a famous dispute between Rava and Abaye, and they call the Davar Gadol is Maaseh Merkavah and Maaseh Bereshit. The Davar Katan is the study of the Talmud and the Mishnah. Obviously, these are relative terms when we say Davar Katan, but the point is, after 2,000 years, when one wanted to be very close to God and very holy, he would physically attend the temple. After the destruction of the temple, everything got moved back into the 4 cubits of halacha. And then the more you studied and the more you knew, that was the indication of you getting closer to God. But, as we said many times, that's not the ideal necessarily. More, that was like a default system that we went into.
Yeah.
Right. So I would say that would be what we'd say, like the Bitul Torah. The Bitul Torah is easy. People not focusing on Torah. However, what I was just pointing out over here is that we could still not necessarily focus on Talmud, or let's say classical Torah study day in, day out, all day. Rather, there could be other versions of doing this, which would still keep us in the world of maintaining Torah and perpetuating Torah, and not necessarily see it as abandoning the Torah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends, because you say like because from the perspective here and the perspective that you're saying, the main thing is Talmud, to learn the Talmud. But from my perspective, where I'm coming from, like specifically, that assumes that I would think that assumes that I have a good knowledge of the Torah itself, and Jewish perspective and worldview, which I didn't necessarily. So there's it might be assuming even like understanding before you go into Talmud, because this is also something that I'm thinking about in terms of what to learn first. Like how to systematize it for myself. But yeah.
So using you as an example, and obviously you're not the transgressors of Israel, you have to imagine in this example that he could be looking at, let's pretend the sages of Israel are standing next to him, right? And they're like, look at these hoodlums. He's like, okay. I mean, this is like today it's a cliche, but what was that movie called? Dangerous Minds, where they have that famous song, Gangster's Paradise.
I think, I don't remember the name of
But every movie where a teacher goes to the projects to help the kids, and she's gonna rap, and you can be like, what are you gonna do? So, so King David was saying, like, you guys are staying over here about like why they don't know anything in like the tractate of Yavamot. I'm gonna go right now and engage with them with the deep depth of sweet honey Torah, and explain to them how some beautiful sequence of words connects to like the essence of the Torah, and I'm going to engage with them that way.
Yeah.
So similar to you right now, right? We could come and be like, or I'll take another example, the famous person that came to Hillel and said, like, I want to learn the whole Torah, right? And he says, like, Derech Eretz Kadmal Torah. So like, it's ultimately we're moving back to trying to create a better place, create a connection between us and our Maker, know him by seeing him in the world and acting as such. So there's a way where there's a place where you want to be engaging more. However, we're fortunate enough today where you can quote unquote dive into the deep end.
Yeah.
And potentially that's what's necessary, because you could come and say, Chezi, doing this right now is a lot more engaging for me than studying this argument in the Gemara, or breaking my teeth on an Aramaic language, which, happens to be in Aramaic because they're in Babylon. And if they were in China, it would have been a different language. So like, I'm trying to get to the Torah right now.
Yeah.
And hence, on a very practical level, I have a very hard time when these kids come to Israel for the first time, when they finish high school, to study in Israel for a year or two. And the first half of a year is breaking their teeth on a foreign language. And you could be like, well, they should have been better prepared at home, maybe. But I think if you came here to study and learn, then I don't know if if it's been half a year and you're still having a hard time, then you're losing a lot of your study time.
Right, because it's also momentum. It's like we want to gain the momentum of being able to capture something and get an appetite for it and continue with it. Yeah.
We have a line here from Upcycle Club, which tells us, Chapter 4, Mishnah 1, Ezehu Chacham Halomed Mikol Adam.
Yeah.
Who is wise? One who learns from every person. Correct. And we see that again and again and again. And again, also a cliche where you see in a movie, the hero looks at like the lowly servant and gives him a face. I'm like, wow, you surprised me. You could help me. And you're like, yes, everyone has potential for greatness. As we said, v'yesh lecha betelim harbe kenegdecha. And there will be many more causes of neglect before you. So the English translation gives us a little hint of like where we're going with this, which says basically that if you prioritize other stuff, these new priorities will end up creating more versions where I'm sort of missing out and then I'm losing on both ends. I didn't get to study Torah, and the things I wanted to work out didn't necessarily work out. Again, there is some sense of here which is supposed to be, from above, right? Yeah. That like you'll quote unquote be punished. It more has to do with it's unwise to neglect the Torah, because if you're disregarding the Torah, you're showing like a lack of understanding of what's important. And without that level of discernment, other things will, occupy you and you'll get confused, and then it will lead to bad business practices. It will lead to bad decision-making. And here they're sort of playing off the idea that like, if you're messing around with Torah, you're clearly going to mess around with other things eventually as well.
Right. So it's like you're starting some kind of pattern within yourself. Like if the biggest thing, if you're neglecting the biggest thing, and if you're letting that responsibility kind of like, I don't have the right word for it, but yeah, if you're neglecting that kind of responsibility, then it maybe like seeps into you where smaller things along the way kind of like become less important, or you start kind of like being more lazy or less attentive. Yeah.
And as the Mishnah tells us in a different portion, Im lo achshav ematai, right? If not now, when? As we read earlier on. And there's a sense also of urgency again here, which is we're saying that if you're going to mess, like you just said, if you're going to start already here at this point, putting in bad code, then down the line, there's going to be a hiccup. There's going to be issues because you're starting with bad code. So here too, if you decide to be like, I'll just do this later, then later you're already going to be pushing off the next thing. And then, it starts that dangerous pattern.
Do you have like you have a famous example of this?
Of what?
Of this happening, or maybe this happened to somebody that, maybe
where someone that didn't focus on Torah specifically, then his priorities don't work out. And the answer to that is no, because we see people that are completely secular and are quote unquote billionaires, right? And then they'll be like, well, what does that mean? Or so this ultimately means that these things are talking in sort of in God's language, or the stages are borrowing from God's language, which this is long-term conversation, right? So they're going to be like, if you want to point at like the Babylonians, well, they're gone now. So I guess it didn't really work out for them to focus on it. Now you'd be like, well, that's a really long, scope. But arguably the Jews could be like, great, and I'm still here to talk about it, right? So like I'm still promulgating this truth, and so far, it's the little Jew that could, right? It keeps on chugging up that mountain. Yeah. So the sense would be that ultimately, and I mean, you could come and say like, well, Christianity and Islam, they're still being nurtured from the Torah. So like, even though like you could say they're not focusing on Torah study, it's still Torah being Torah, the unification of God is being promulgated around the world, right? So you could still say that these two are still continuing on this path. I would also say that a lot of the Torah values have already been integrated in many ways into our society as well. So here too, you could have like a lot of that happening as well. But I think it's more a sense of, it's true in a smaller sense, which is like you should find the right thing to prioritize on the top of your hierarchy, because otherwise you're doing idol worship, and down the line that leads you to nowhere. So here too, like it's what goes up first, and you could say it's Torah study, but we obviously realize Torah study really means devotion to God.
Yeah.
If I think of like a specific example, of someone.
No, that was a good answer.
Someone like close a book and be like, I'm done studying, pick up his phone. All my answers. Yeah. Everything was taken from me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All his patents get stolen at that moment. Now, but on the flip side,
Lumiel, right? I mean, that's, well, maybe not, but isn't there two characters? There's Shlumiel and the one that doesn't have luck.
I remember Shlumiel. That's like the Shlumiel is someone that's sort of like a ragtag or
clumsy. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe, I can't remember exactly what the other one.
And now on the flip side, they have the Imamalta Batorah yesh lo sachar harbe liten lecha. So in classic Chazal form, right? If you focus on the Torah, you're going to gain much wealth. And we can look at that again as the flip side, as God will reward you. Or if you prioritize properly, then you'll be able to engage in more things more seriously. And if you engage more seriously, you'll be able to grow and expand. So again, this is also promises that we're giving. Hopefully the individual in a certain sense believes that this change could happen now, but the sense is also for future generations that this is a proper pattern this is proper code to push forward, to promulgate. And there's also a sense of, here they use the word amel, and in Hebrew it's toil, right? Which I would just say that there's a difference between studying and toiling in Torah. So and you could say that this is also the person that gets this big reward is someone that really puts in the toiling work. It's more than just like the study. It's also physical. It's the real necessary commitment to deep Torah study, and that is for people that are trying to truly excel in the study of Torah.
Isn't there a Mishnah soon? I don't know how soon, but like with the ant, and they use milah, the word as well. Be as
namel or namela.
No, like be as toiling as the ant, or be as like.
I'm thinking about making your ear kafarkeset, but I'm not remembering right now one of an namela, of an ant.
Maybe I need to.
But it could be that there is one. I'm just not remembering it right now.
Yeah, I can look it up. But yeah.
Okay. Next Mishnah, I think.
Yes. Let me get to that.
You want to give it a go?
Yep. You just make sure that you can see this.
Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov אומר, העושה מצווה אחת, קונה לו פרקליט אחד, והעובר עבירה אחת, קונה לו קטגור אחד. תשובה ומעשים טובים כתריס בפני הפורענות. Should we do that? And then we'll go into Rabbi Yochanan?
Yeah, do you want to just read that part in English?
Yep. Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Yaakov, would say, he who fulfills one mitzvah acquires for himself one angel, advocate. He who commits one transgression acquires against himself one angel, accuser. Repentance, and good deeds are as a shield against retribution.
Okay, so Rabbi Eliezer, son of Yaakov, he's also a student of Rabbi Akiva. Well, there's two Rabbi Eliezers, one that's during the first temple period, and one that's after. So if I'm saying it's the student of Rabbi Akiva, I'm saying it's the other one. But it's and it makes sense because we're talking about in connection of students of Rabbi Akiva. So like we're at that period, but in theory, it could be the other one. I don't have any great stories off the top of my head.
No great stories about Rabbi Eliezer? Okay.
Well, the one that was during the temple talks about, what he remembers during the temple. But The other one, I don't know. Maybe he had great shoes. I don't know.
Yeah, man.
I don't know what he's known for. So, off the bat, it would be strange. Why does someone that does a good deed, why does he need a defense attorney?
Right.
So the idea is that the person that's doing the good deed might not always have the opportunity to do a good deed. And the idea is that he needs a defense attorney, so to speak, to, on his behalf, say he's not doing good deeds now, not because he doesn't want to, because we see already that he did the good deeds. It's just he doesn't have the opportunity right now. He doesn't have the time right now. You have to understand he's been very busy. But the way you could sort of build this this defense attorney, right, or empower the defense attorney, is you have to do good deeds from your own accord. And that starts building that sense where okay, we know he's not doing it right now, but clearly that is his intention.
Yeah.
Right. And this, I'm sure you guys spoke about this in Tanya as well. This aligns with the Talmudic and clearly the Kabbalistic understanding that our actions create spiritual realities. Right. Mm-hmm. So if I know I'm doing this good deed, so here we're calling it a defense attorney, but the idea is you're creating a spiritual reality that could in a certain way, in a certain sense, be at your defense.
Yeah.
And sort of create a picture of the world where it's saying no, this person is actually trying, and you could say those realities then work together with you. And this relates to what we said earlier about what if I negate the Torah? So again, I'm creating these realities which could be beneficial to me or could be very detrimental to me. And we talk about someone that is focusing on being even pessimistic. You could say that kind of mindset is already, you're creating this pessimistic reality, which then makes it very difficult for you to get out of bed, move, do, right? So when they tell people to go touch grass, so to speak, the idea is to get out there and actually be part of the world, because if you just stay within your little world in your head, that could be obviously very detrimental to you. So I don't know if again, that's not a live example, but that's just another idea of what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. And there is also, this kind of language kind of gives you an idea maybe of how one, by doing one mitzvah where you acquire yourself an angel, an advocate, it's this thing that can compound even beyond yourself, where it creates a new reality in the world where it advocates not just for yourself, it advocates for other people. So obviously when you do something, especially if you do it with other people or to other people, then you kind of it can be contagious, or for better or for worse.
The famous movie Pay It Forward,
mm-hmm.
Right? Yep. So that's the whole idea. And that movie sort of starts with this rainy, if I believe, it's this rainy scene. There's a car accident and some guy goes to some other person and says just take my car and drive home. He's like, who are you? It doesn't matter. And the idea was that person stuck in the side of the road just benefited from something that started 2 years ago, right? It was part of that sending out that sort of spirituality into the world and having it, you literally said, affect. And if let's say Jordan Peterson talks about, LGBTQ being a social contagion, right? So there's a positive version of that as well.
Yeah.
So the flip of what we just said, right? If you do a bad deed, it's obvious why you have this accusing angel. And the attitude is because he's pointing out saying, see, when he did have the opportunity, he did the bad thing, and you're sending out this negative energy, which is not that I'm trying, but it's not working out. Rather is that I'm purposely not attempting, not trying. And this is sort of my new mode of being. So hence you get, like you just said, it compounds and it becomes very problematic. And then you have seemingly the world working against you, right? When someone says why is the whole world against me? You could assume say he's sending out those energies, and those energies are what the sages here are what categorizing as this accusing angel, right? That's what that sense is. The world is closing on me. The world is against me. That feels very accusatory.
Right, and it's like it's also kind of like a trial where, like it's like a heavenly trial where you might have one prosecutor and one advocate,
Defense attorney.
the defense attorney, the advocate. So you're seeing they're fighting on both sides. One is trying to reduce the divine justice or to change it, and one is trying to advocate for it, right? So,
well, one is asking for din, for justice,
yeah.
and one is asking for there to be chesed,
Mm-hmm.
and recognize that really, even though it's seemingly he's doing something bad, the intention is good. The other one is saying, clearly it's bad, so be just and punish him because he did something bad.
Yeah.
Not that the other one's asking for something evil, rather the other one wants, like, that left hand of God. He wants it. He wants that justice struck, right? At some point you need to make a decision. You got to cut the cord.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So I'll just give an example because I was just reading this chapter in the book that we're reading for the book club, Kabbalah of Forgiveness, that discusses...
You're talking to me about other things?
Other book clubs, yeah. So I apologize.
Okay, go on.
But I was talking about these the angels and the prosecutors, and it was trying to talk about giving an example from, let's say you're with your spouse, and your spouse is making you angry, so you can try to, before she makes you angry, what you can do is you can try to help her set up her own defense attorneys, meaning when she maybe takes the trash out or does the dishes, that becomes this one redeeming quality. Hopefully there's more stuff that she does, but like more qualitative stuff that she does. But those things are kind of like avatars or things that you can keep in your heart when the anger, when something bad happens, you can remember, well, at least she's doing all those things for me, so at least I can remember that, and those would advocate for her and for me to kind of like remove my anger and just remember that specifically.
I'm laughing because the move I do is I go at night when all my kids are sleeping, and I look at them at night, and that charges me for the times where, like, I'm like, now they're quiet and they look like little angels, and I love them. And then when I see them tomorrow morning, I'm like, remember, they're the cutest little kids. But in a certain sense, that's also sort of what steel manning is, right? You want to come and say, like, I want to really put myself in your shoes and give the best argument I can for, like, why you did X or why you're looking at things this way. And if one could constantly practice with that kind of mindset, or as we say, ladun kol adam lekav zchut, right? Yeah. We should be looking at everyone's and judging by, like, his the best of his deeds. So that is a very healthy mindset.
Yeah.
Okay, onwards. And v'tshuva u'ma'asim tovim ketris b'pei hapuranut. Right? Repentance and good deeds are as a shield against retribution. So the retribution that we're talking about, we're going back to this court case, right? So now, seemingly, right, on one hand, in both versions that we explained right now, the case is that you're being judged right now. And clearly no one's sure, right? One guy is saying that, like, no, usually he's great.
Yeah.
One guy's saying he's not great, but no one is there, just like, clearly you're in question. Right? So, like, if you're uncomfortable in this scenario, in this position, the attitude is, guess what? You could click, like, I forget what the buttons are when we were playing Mortal Kombat, but click that combo and you have your shield, your tris.
Yeah.
Okay. And this, generally, like, your shield is protecting you from, arrows, if we're using this analogy. And each mitzvah is like a shield that is against, like, a specific kind of harm, but it's not enough. Just like, because there could be shooting an arrow, and someone could be coming on the other side with, like, a lance at you. So if you want to be fully protected, it requires many good deeds and many mitzvot, because each one sort of contradicts the other one, right? And so that's all the shield. But to really fight back, you need your sword. And in this case, it would be what we went back earlier, like the Torah study, right? So if you want to work on like repentance and shape your character in the proper way, so you need to have your shield up, you need your good deeds, and you need your repentance, which is to reshape your character and then come out sort of swinging. Sort of, like you come out with your sword then, and swinging in this case would be, doing charity, like Maimonides says, is like the antidote against like stringiness, right? Like, so that's like sort of, that would be like the sword to fight against that issue.
Yeah.
And showing love would be, fighting back against like the anger traits. So you have to, again, do the good deeds to give yourself that shield, and then repent and act in the ways of Torah to be able to, actually move forward and gain ground.
Right, because the repentance is a creative process, because you're creating a new identity, new behaviors. So you're reshaping yourself and the reality around you. So it's creative beyond the reactive.
Right. So the shield is passive.
Right?
Yeah. And I'm being active. Exactly. So they're saying you need both, right? You need to fortify your shield, and at the same time, slowly, in the movie 300, there's like this scene where they just like push and push, like slowly, step by step, they gain that ground, while making sure they have that whole beautiful, shield of all, like the layers of shield of all of them, making sure that like the weakest link was going to allow the arrow in. But if they're all oriented properly, acting as one lance, then it's actually a very, very productive shield.
Yeah.
There's the example, Sparta. Okay. Okay. Onwards, we were at in the middle of here with Rabbi Yochanan.
Yep.
So Rabbi Yochanan Hasandlau Omer, Kol Knesiyah Shehi L'Shem Shamayim Sofa Litkayem, V'Kol Knesiyah Shehi L'Shem Shamayim Sofa Litkayem, V'Sheina L'Shem Shamayim Ena Sofa Litkayem. Rabbi Yochanan, the sandal maker or cobbler, I guess, would say, every gathering that is for heaven's sake will endure. That is not for heaven's sake will not endure, right? So we've seen a lot of these switches. So Yochanan, the sandal maker, for the opinions that say that rabbis work, he was a sandal maker.
Yeah.
For the opinions that say that rabbis don't work, his name is Sandlar, and this is a short name for Yochanan from Alexandria. Alexandrar, that's where they say the name comes from. The name Alexander made it into Jewish homes. There's a famous story in the Talmud with this interaction of the high priest and Alexander. This predates the Hanukkah story. This is like where the Hellenist letters, so to speak, make their way inside and start intertwining with the Hebrew letters. And they say that a lot of children were called Alexander at that time, and that name has stayed with us ever since. So in this case, they're saying this Rabbi Yochanan guy, he is from this place, Alexandria, in this case, and that's why it's his name. I like the idea that he was a cobbler and actually working. He also was a student of Rabbi Akiva, as we're going through all the people here that are connected to Rabbi Akiva, and he famously even studied at Rabbi Akiva when Rabbi Akiva was in jail. Rabbi Akiva was teaching Torah publicly, which was forbade. He gets into jail eventually. He gets killed, like we spoke about in the famous one of the 10 martyrs. But his student, Rabbi Yochanan, would come listen to him in being very clandestine and coming at night and learning Torah from him as well.
Yeah.
So we're talking about over here of these gatherings for heaven's sake. So again, generally they're telling us that, congregating or gathering for holy things will obviously last, so will endure. One of the most famous gathering would be Mount Sinai, right? So that would be like the most holy gathering of everyone together. And in the Torah, initially, groups are called mishpachot, family. And later on, we start calling them goyim, which people think is a bad word, but goyim is a nation. Even Israel is called a goy gadol. And this is like reflecting, you could see like a shift from a cultural bond to like a territorial bond, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But God's promise to Abraham is v'nivrachu b'cha kol mishpachot ha'adama, right? All the nations of the world will be blessed by you. But in English, the translation is nations. In Hebrew, it's mishpachot, which means families. Yeah. And the attitude is that this is sort of, again, and this has to do with the gatherings, where we're asking to do like this national idea that is sort of aimed more on cultural familial bonds and less on territorial bonds. Right. So while there's a lot of talk about Israel right now and like West Bank, where we're going to be, it's unfortunate that we have to be playing with it on that level, because really, we're trying to have a conversation, which is, it's not about where the border is. Mm-hmm. It's more about us understanding that we're all one, we're all family, we all should be oriented together. We want to go back to the conversation of families, of those familial congregations together, right, and not necessarily territorial or geographical congregations. Mm-hmm. And there's also, just with regards to dovetailing on what I just said right now, there's also the specific terminology with regards to the Torah uses for culture. They usually use the word lashon, which means like language. But and that would symbolize something that's more like internal, like an internal bond, because it's in my mouth. And then there's safa, right, which is also language, but that is air coming out, that's external, right? So we're less looking to have this idea of the safa, of the breath, so to speak. It's more about the lashon, the tongue, the internal way of communicating, which is more intimate.
Right. I guess Bavel, in the Tower of Babel, they use Safa. It uses like they would have Safa, or they were trying to. They
started with Safachat Dvarim Achadim, right? Yeah. And that would be, as we move into this, V'sheina l'shem shamayim and Safa litkayam, an unholy gathering, and that famous one would be the Tower of Babel, right, where you could see a gathering where seemingly you'd be like, oh, we're gathering, that's awesome. The problem is we're not gathering properly over here. Yeah. The Safachat Dvarim Achadim shows that there's no room for anything else. There's only one language, and their things mean one thing, and that starts feeling very authoritarian in a certain point, and less freedom over there. So obviously, even like a standard congregation or gathering of good intentions, but there's nothing holy over there, won't sustain for very long. And I think we could see this also from, let's say, a sociological point of view, that like naturally human beings form groups, right? So you could see but you could see this happens automatically. Yeah. The problem is that groups need more than just like the natural cohesion between them to endure like a long time. You have to start aligning your values, and generally speaking, you want to have like something on top over there, which is orienting to you, all of you guys, to be aligned. So that's why you need that orienting factor. And what we're claiming, obviously, over here, that should be God. And for many years, obviously, there's been some sort of power that you could see people gather around. And this is what we alluded to earlier. We're like, Chezi, where can you give me an example where like he didn't do a good job and it didn't work out? So that's sort of what they're using when they say the word sofa, or endured, right? Which is like down the line, long term, it's not going to work. So you could say like, yeah, there's a business that's successful right now, or yes, Jeffrey Epstein has his island and they gather there all the time and it's all working out. But down the line, it's not going to endure because it's not oriented properly.
Right. So yeah, so that's kind of, you mentioned this. This is what we talked about before in terms of if you remove any parts of the Torah, or you disregard it, or you're flippant or inattentive, then you're not destined to. Then other things will become chaotic down the road, or things will start to fray. And I think you can see that. And obviously this has been kind of like a discussion around, like in the corner. I think it's what brought a lot of different people into here, because they're seeing things starting to fray and they're trying to figure out why is this happening.
And it's not enough to satisfy like the physical or the social needs, right? Like you need something spiritual. You need moral aspects of the human life that really, you want to move forward with. And this, like you just said, the meaning crisis. Like, what are we? It doesn't matter that we're countries and we're people all together until talking on social media. What are we doing? Where are we walking towards? And I'm just thinking about this like as like an interesting example of this. In the morning in Jewish law, if I'm on the way to go to prayer, and I don't like the Torah says, not the Torah says, the halacha says, the rabbis say, don't seek out someone to say good morning to before you go to prayer, right? Like, don't say, I think they use the word safra tava, which in Aramaic means good morning. But the idea is that like the social, like valuing the social interaction over the spiritual relationship is not the proper hierarchy. However, the same halacha also says, if you're on the way to synagogue and you see another friend of yours that's also going to synagogue, you could say hi to him. You could engage with him. We're not saying you should be a jerk, but the attitude is, in today's day and age, if you wake up in the morning and the first thing you're checking is your social media, then it's a problem.
Yeah.
Like that connection should not be the priority. And I'm sure there's many people that wake up and the first thing they do is their LinkedIn and they check their things. Or, I mean, I wake up in the morning and while I pray and I focus, I'm looking at my emails, right? If I got something in, and that is something that we need to learn how to, and it's, I would say it's less about, in our case, people say like, I put my phone, I only touch it an hour after I wake up. And there's a lot for that, which is like, it's too much noise in my head. I don't want to be focusing on that. That's true. We're stressing a different point, which is, it could be that it's a very important message that's coming in, but you didn't even pray yet. So, I think that example makes sense. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Number 12. Yeah, I think we could still do number 12. Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua Omer. היא כבוד תלמידך חביב עליך כשלך, I remember this, וכבוד חבריך כמורה רבך, ומורה רבך כמורה שמיים. Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Shamuel, would say, the dignity of your student should be as precious to you as your own, the dignity of your colleague as your awe of your master, and the awe of your master as the awe of heaven. So what are they telling us over here? Rabbi Eliezer ben Shamua, also not a very famous rabbi, famous saying, but not a famous rabbi. Also hanging out with Rabbi Akiva and his boys during that period. So what is he telling us over here? Because seemingly it's not such a clear Mishnah, because off the bat, students aren't friends. I mean, students are not necessarily friends. If we're categorizing that way, it doesn't mean that a student can also be a friend, but like students are not your friends and rabbis aren't your masters, and the rabbi isn't like heaven. On the other hand, we see that they're playing again over here, which there is a certain aspect where a student is like a friend, and there is a place where you could see the rabbi is sort of like a teacher. So we could see that we could decide to look at it just as harsh categories, or we could start digging a little deeper and see that they're asking us to look at all these people in some way, at some point on even footing. And this also relates back to what we were saying earlier about everyone has his place and people should respect people. So in order to get to a place where you're looking at your student like your rabbi, at the very least, you have to first humble yourself, like we said earlier. And at the very least, you have to make sure that you're listening to what other people are saying, because none of that's going to happen without doing those prerequisites first. And there's a famous line that Rabbi Hanina says, not over here, but it says, Mikol melamdai hiskalti. Right. So he says that I learned a lot from my teachers and I learned a lot from my colleagues, but the most I learned was from my students. And in a certain sense, you could say like the students are the teacher's teacher, right? We mentioned this also, I think 2 weeks ago, they're bringing out from their teacher his real truth, his real essence in a certain way.
Right. And we can bring in what Upcycle Club said before about about the Mishnah, who is wise,
what he mentioned in the comments.
Yeah.
And through the student, it allows the teacher to continue on his wisdom. And because of that, because the student allows you to promulgate your wisdom and sort of an extension of you, that's another reason why you have to show him respect. So it's not telling you necessarily, yes, in a certain sense where you're also learning from him, but it's also important that you're seeing them in a respectful frame, because that will allow you then to really push this Torah study on, right? And there's a sense where even the wisdom of the Torah, it's also telling us, the reader, recognize that the Torah is not the wisdom of the teachers. Rather, that's the wisdom from God that he gave us like sort of in Sinai. And in that sense, it's more like, the sages are a pregnant woman, right, that have the Torah with them. And we, the students, are the midwife, right? And we require this relationship where I could extract the Torah out of you, and I could actualize what you're teaching me.
Right.
But that requires, again, this respect, reciprocation for that to happen well, right? I need to know that you're about to give me this gift called the baby or the Torah, and you need to realize that you trust me enough to understand what I'm doing and actually deliver this baby and actually bring it in to this earth.
Right, because like we mentioned a while ago, like the things that obviously the teacher has a responsibility in producing or sharing information in the right way, or in the way that the student can perceive it in the right way. But you also acknowledge that the student has a responsibility, like you said, to actualize it, to make something of it in the world. So it's interesting that he talks about different dynamics here, about like, you see somebody as yourself, right? Or as respectful, the kavod, the dignity as yourself, and then seeing somebody, and then the dynamic of giving somebody more respect than you might, than their title, or you might think they should have, like just elevating that even more so.
Because at the next point, you're at the different part of the ladder where you want someone else looking at you the same way, right? You want someone to, in a certain way, assume or believe that you could also know more than you sort of let on, right? So at some point, I want to be looked at a rabbi. At some point, I want to be looked at a student. At some point, I want to be looked at a friend. And there's a sense also that if I think that the Torah that you're teaching me are my own words, right, that sort of falls into the land of philosophy in a certain extent. And the teacher could be sort of locked in his own loop. However, if the student is listening to it and thinks it's the words from God, right, when we're saying that you have to look at your teacher like, that the awe of heaven, then I allow it to pass through me. Like, I'm not letting it get locked up and stay in my head because they're my words now, and I'm this great philosopher. Rather, you're giving it to me and I'm letting it go through. And if I let it go through, I might come to a completely different understanding from the words that the teacher told me that the teacher never even noticed. Right? Because he wasn't necessarily let it flow through him. There's a rabbi, David HaKohen, who's famously known as the Nazir, the Nazarite rabbi, who was a student of Rav Kook, one of his closest students, and he put together a lot of Rav Kook's writings, took his notes, took his classes, and put them together. And Rav Kook famously told him that when I read your notes of mine, I discover myself, right? Like, I discover what I said, because like I said something, you understood what I said, and then explained it back to me, and I'm like, I know a deeper version of what I was telling you that I never actually thought I understood, but clearly that was somewhere deep inside me. Another very famous story about this, we might have spoken about this in the past, which is Moses wants to go into Israel. God says he can't. Let me just at least be a student. So he brings him in and he sits in the 7th row of Rabbi Akiva's class. Mm-hmm. And he's saying things that Moses has no idea what he's talking about. And Moses gets very weak. And then someone asks, how do we know this? And Rabbi Akiva answers him, we know this from the tradition from Moses from Sinai, Torah Moshe Sinai. And when Moshe hears that, he gets nichamtani, he gets reassured, right? He feels better. And the idea is, like, in theory, if we're thinking about like the way the Western world looks at it, he should say, like, I never said that. Like, this is not what I said. I didn't even know what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Rather, there's a sense where Moshe realizes that everything is connected back to him. And these are things that maybe he didn't understand at the time, but these are branches from his tree, so to speak. And you're only going to be able to learn that if you, at that moment, he saw himself as the student, not as the rabbi, right. But the student was teaching him based on what he learned from himself as a rabbi, right? So there's sort of like this yin yang happening at the same time. It just, they're both at different vantage points, and they're both looking at things from a different perspective. Mm-hmm.
So I guess the one maybe like more like devil advocate question would be, if you assume that if you're in awe of your master, is you assume that is the awe of heaven, or you're saying those are divine words that are coming through, how do you handle like, how do you know, like, does that not make the teacher faultless?
That's like, basically you're saying that this
what you're interpreting right now, I think is the word.
Right. So looking at this mission in theory, you could say that we're looking at this and we're basically saying that from the first glance, right, that I'm looking at this Torah as basically this teacher's, right? He is now being dignified in a certain way. And mm-hmm. we know people that look at rabbis and be like, these are like the most pious, the most holy. Mm-hmm. Basically, they're God in a certain sense. And what we're saying over here is to recognize, to not look at the rabbi as like, you should look at the rabbi as like a small God compared to the great God, which is in heaven, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not saying revere your rabbi like heaven, rather be fearful to not look at your rabbi as if he's God, right? So I'm saying it's the exact opposite of what it would seem like in the beginning. But really, it's telling you that in this case, be wary not to think that the rabbi itself, as in we put you through these loops. The friend is the student is the teacher is the rest. So all that's true.
Yeah.
However, when it gets to God, and you could be like, and I should look at the rabbi like God. No. When it gets to God, recognize the difference. The source is God. And that is, like we said earlier, because the source is God, if the rabbi is oriented properly, it will flow through him like the pregnant woman to the student who could be the midwife and take it, who could then bring it back to the rabbi, right? I just taught the baby the new trick. Even though the baby's yours, guess what he could do now that he was hanging out with me? The rabbi now becomes the teacher, right? So all this is happening at the same time, which sort of leaves us with this friend, right? Because we didn't really like focus too much on the idea of the friend.
Yeah.
But here too, I think we know about there's like a friendship between people. Real friendship is helping each other out, right? And helping each other out is really putting someone else ahead of me in a true sense of that kind of friendship. Also, right? To the way I would want myself to be loved and appreciated, I generally do that to someone else. And if I'm doing that to someone else, here you could see that you are honoring and sort of putting him on a pedestal in a certain extent and recognizing him as a true friend where you want to do things for him.
Yeah.
In general, there's a sense also, like we're just talking about, like honoring over here, that, I mean, God himself is called HaKavod, right? David talks about Hitorari, Kavod, like, you know, they should wake up. So this is also, the honor is to recognize where sort of God is sort of in between the lines, right? In his soul, I can recognize there's God is there, that the divine is there, and that's why I want to honor it. That's why I want to connect it. So there's also this play of words, which is recognizing the divine and then honoring that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder also, kavod is like heavy, kaved. So when it tells you kavod talmidcha chaviv alecha keshilcha, it's like the hardship of your friend, what is heavy for your friend. It's like with the donkey. It's like you want to see the toils of your friend as your own. So you want to help out and be there for them.
For sure. And it's more than just, it's more of like an intrinsic value, right? That's like built inside, and it's like beyond the point that's just like revealed that you could just see. There's something inside that's telling you to again, and that's why it sort of relates back to the soul, right? You're not seeing it, but it's something that is still present nonetheless. Okay, I think we'll stop there.